The previous speakers really moved me. And I'm going to speak from that place that they created. So for anyone that's sitting here thinking, how do you do this? Have a little nap, a little sleep. And I'm going to follow on from what they pointed to, which is that everybody in this room already has everything that we're talking about. That we've all experienced these moments that Mara and Eric and the previous speakers, I'm not even going to try and pronounce your name, sorry. I'm too nervous. Were mentioning. And that I'm going to tell you some stories that are really just that same thing again. That's something inside us that can make a decision. I made my life miserable and now I'm going to make it happy. Or that I saw my father in one way and now I can see him in another. Or like for me, I had to pretend to be confident and then I could just be confident. Everybody has experienced something where they just had a change of heart or a change of mind. And in the simplest way possible, that's what we're talking about. So as announced, my name is Jacqueline Hollows. I run a non-profit organisation called Beyond Recovery. And I teach this understanding to people in prison and people in the community with addictions and mental health issues, and sometimes the professionals that support those people. So I bring some stories from prison for you, which reiterates what the previous speakers have said. And the first story is about a man who you wouldn't like. He was a nasty man, a big, violent, scary-looking man. He was 35 years old, and at 5, told his teacher he wanted to be a gangster. And he made that come true. His whole family was involved in drugs and guns, and for him it was really exciting that they used to hide behind the sofa when the police came to the door, and he knew where to hide the firearms, and he lived that whole life of stealing and fighting. And even in prison, he followed that same life, because that's all he knew, how to use the power of his mind, was to make that happen. So he was one of the highest risk prisoners, meaning that he would fight the officers and do illegal things in prison, like getting drugs and getting phones and weapons. And he hurt many people. And he realized that prison was his life, and that when he gets out of prison on these sentences that he serves, he has, say, 6 months to do as much as he can in 6 months, because he'd be back in prison again. So that he just accepted that that's how it would be for him for the rest of his life. And he had one of those moments where he suddenly realized, I'm living in my negative thinking. That he'd been so affected constantly by PTSD, by depression, that he was on many legal medications, antidepressants, anti-anxiety tablets. He'd got lots of diagnoses of personality disorder, and so on. And he sat in our class, arguing with us and angry at us because he thought it can't be so simple. What are you talking about? It's a load of rubbish. And he had that thought. I've been living in my negative thinking. And for him, that thought opened a new world. It opened the possibility of feeling good about life. And he followed that thought like we do, right? We all follow thought. He followed that thought, and that led him to read some of the materials that Sydney Banks, who you've heard mention, who's the person who brought this to the world as we understand it. He read some of that material and he stayed in class and so on. So we're like 18 months later now, today, as we stand, and he wrote the letter that Martin spoke of in the conference last year in the UK. And he wrote an updated letter this year. And there's been many behavioural changes, like he's very compassionate, he loves his daughter, he realised it's more important to spend time with his daughter on a visit instead of getting up to his activities that he used to get up to. He doesn't fight with the officers. He became the most trusted prisoner in the prison. He's won awards. And what I really noticed about him was that he wrote a letter after several months that I read at the conference, and a year later he wrote another. And those two letters were like different people. The language had changed. There was no swear words. And his vocabulary had changed, his intelligence had increased, his interest in other people had increased. Because when you have a switch, your whole life changes. Everything inside you comes forth to help you. And he wasn't a prisoner in his mind anymore. So he could have freedom in prison. He could feel compassion for the people that he's hurt, but know that there's nothing he can do about that except for not do it again. And it's funny because now he can't even watch something called Britain's Got Talent without crying. His levels of compassion have risen so much. You just talk to him and he's in tears. And so we see these changes all the time. And they're huge because of the state of mind that that person lived in for so long, and the things that they did in that state of mind look so bad to us. They look huge. It looks impossible, or it looks amazing. But I can't say enough how that's just exactly the same as not reacting, realising when I argue with my husband, I might be in a bit of a low state of mind today. I might just walk away from that. And that, what Linda and George Pranksy talked about, not creating that war between us. It's the same thing. It comes from the same place. Would you like me to tell you another story? So I was recently working with a guy who's a chronic schizophrenic. He's on high dosage, does that translate? He's on a high dosage of medication to keep him calm. And he's a Rastafarian. So he has, you know, a culture of beliefs about compassion and love and so on. Anyway, you wouldn't know that. So he came into an introduction class that we were running, and there were a number of gang leaders in the class, so they were very opinionated, and they wanted to share their stories and their opinions. And sometimes I let them just have free rein for a while and get it out of the system. But it was too much for him. It got very noisy. So he left the class, and he demanded that he was taken back to his cell. And he was shouting and screaming at the officers, and very unhappy. And I heard the commotion and went out to speak to him. And we have rules, lots of rules in prison that we have to abide by too. And we can't move the prisoners without certain things being in place. So basically, he couldn't go. So I just spoke with him. And I said, what can we do to make it more comfortable for you? And he was really angsty, and his dreadlocks were flying everywhere. And he looked at me. I don't even know if he heard the words that I said, but he just said, don't worry about it, I'll chill out. I'll relax at the back of the room. And so he came back in, and he just sat with his head in his hands for the rest of the time. So at the end, he said, I'll come on your group. And so I put his name down, and the next week he turned up, but he was back into shouting, why are you putting me on groups? What's going on? So I said, don't worry, I'll take your name off. But thank you for coming and telling us. And he looked at me, and his little face looked like a little 5-year-old boy. And he just looked at me with innocence. And he said, can I come on your class? Can I come in your group? I said, well, maybe that's not such a good idea, but we could have some one-to-ones together. So yes, please, yes, please. So I came to see him a couple of weeks later. I gave him the list of dates when I would be seeing him. And they have some gardens where the men can go and learn, you know, various skills. And he works in the gardens. And it was a beautiful sunny day, so we sat outside. And this is a story also for the people who think, how do I teach this? How do I tell other people about this? And I've been working with this understanding for quite a number of years. So I sat next to him. I said, let's sit outside in the sunshine. And I sat next to him. And I had the thought, how do I teach him the principles? Followed by, you don't have to. So I looked at him and I said, what's it like to be a schizophrenic? And he looked really shocked. He said, what do you mean? I said, well, I'm not schizophrenic. I don't know what it's like. What's it like? And he said, well, I have a thought and it looks like a problem to me. And sometimes it's not even a problem. But it seems like a problem, and it gets bigger in my head, and bigger and bigger and bigger. And when I can't cope anymore, I hear voices, and I have hallucinations. And sometimes when I'm there, I act out, I behave badly, I do things to people. I said, okay, well, that makes sense. And he sort of looked at me, and he said, well, what are your classes about? And then we had a really sweet conversation about life and the garden and how nature grows the flowers. And he told me about some ducks that had been nesting in one of the polytunnels in the gardens in prison, and how the mother duck had started to walk her ducklings around the perimeter to get her used to the men. And that today, for the first time, she walked them out onto the main thing where all the men were. And that he was so inspired by how she just took care of them without knowing anything. So, of course, I was able to talk to him about that energy is inside him, right? Like it's inside me. That energy, that intelligence runs life. And then we do something with it. And sometimes that stuff that we do with it is against ourselves and against other people. And sometimes that stuff that we do with it is amazing, and it's inventive, and it's creative, and it's compassionate. And he really saw that, and he felt calm. But he did look at me and he did say, "You're crazy, aren't you?" And I said, "Do you think so?" He said, "Yeah, but it's nice." And I said, "Well, we're all a bit crazy." So the thing is that it's alive inside all of us, whether we know about it or not. He described what we've been talking about, what you were talking about, perfectly. He's never heard of Sydney Banks, he's never heard of me, he doesn't know what the principles are, but he knows that he gets caught up in his own thought. For him it looks really big, like for me sometimes too. And he knows how nature works, and that nature is inside him too. So we all know, and we're all born with it. And the reason that I work in prisons is alien to me. I don't know why I work in prisons, it's just what I do. It's not my background. So I'll tell you one more story that was my introduction to the prisons, if you'd like. So my background is IT and business. And various things happened that led me to having my first day in prison. Lots of men will tell you that too. And I'm standing there with my clipboard, and we've been trained and we've been told about how you might get taken hostage, and the men will be inappropriate, and they're very dangerous, and all of these things. So I'm standing there with my clipboard. And it had been a particularly bad weekend, so the men were locked up for longer than usual, because if they don't know what to do with them, they lock them up and let them think about themselves. And so they were all banging their cups on the cell doors, and it was just like the movies, you know, where like it's really dangerous and tense. So I was really tense and intimidated. And when they got let out, this great big man, not the other big man, another one, with tattoos on his neck and a shaven head, came up to me and he said, "Can I come in, miss?" So I said, "Oh, I don't think you're on my list. What's your name?" And he said, "No, I'm not on your list. I just want to come in and see the chicks." And chicks in the UK is slang for women. So I said, "Oh, okay." So he came into the classroom and he moved my flip chart out the way. And I thought he wanted to look at the female officers through the window. And on the windowsill was a nest with some little pigeon eggs and a pigeon sitting on the nest. And the man told me that he had another week to be released and that he was hoping that the chicks would be hatched, because chicks is also the name for little baby birds. And that man saved my program, and he's the reason why I'm still there and why I'm able to share with so many people. Because in that instant I felt humble, and I realized how much invisible thinking I had been carrying around with me. I didn't think I was judgmental. I was there to help. I didn't think that I was scared. I just thought I felt a bit intimidated. But actually, there was a ton of invisible thinking and judgments and fear and everything that just fell away when I realized he's just human like me. So I have 3 minutes left. I'm not going to tell you any more stories. Do you have any questions or anything that you'd like to raise? Do you like it? Are you enjoying yourself? Is there anyone with a question? So Mara just prompted me, so I won't repeat what she said. See, the thing is, it's the same for everybody, is that when you see something that makes you feel better about yourself, you become a better mother, yeah? You become a better wife or a better husband. You start to relate in the world in a more positive way. Would you say that's true? Yeah. So in the more extreme cases of these men who have definitely done bad things, and some of them in prison for the rest of their lives, and they should be, but when they start feeling better about themselves, they also start to have better relationships, more compassion, doing more things. So instead of being liabilities and drains on the system and on the prison and causing harm and chaos, they start to become assets. They start to become assets in prison because they start to sit on the prison council and help run it. They start to become assets in their community when they're released because they see what's wrong. They see that we've just been misunderstanding the mind and that they can do something about that. So they work in their communities and they start workshops and work with gangs. So anyone who feels better about themselves sees the bigger picture. Whether you're in business, whether you're in prison, whether you're in an organisation, whether you're a mother, whether you're a child, everyone who starts to feel that, oh, I'm secure, I have resilience, I'm creative, I'm confident, and not pretending like I used to do, but like feeling it, we all become assets. The end.